On February 1st, 2025, President Trump unleashed his ultimate economic weapon, signing an executive order to punish his own neighbors with crippling tariffs. The move was designed to be a show of overwhelming force, bringing Canada and Mexico to their knees. But while Washington prepared for capitulation, a quiet alliance was forming. In secret meetings and coordinated diplomatic maneuvers, America's closest partners began crafting a brilliant counter-strategy. They weren't just fighting back, they were preparing to outsmart the entire scheme. How did two nations turn a president's desperate gambit into a political meltdown? For a generation, North America operated as one of the world's most formidable economic machines. The North American Free Trade Agreement, later renegotiated as the USMCA, wasn't just a deal. It was the blueprint for a continental partnership. It erased economic borders, creating deeply intertwined supply chains that powered all three nations. From the auto plants of Ontario and Querétaro to the agricultural fields of the Midwest, the continent moved as one, a model of shared prosperity built on the idea that they were stronger together. For businesses and workers, this integration meant stability and predictability. But this foundation of cooperation was systematically chipped away by a new confrontational ideology, America First. Donald Trump rose to power by reframing this partnership not as a source of strength, but as a story of American victimization. He argued that Canada and Mexico had taken advantage of the US, stealing jobs and exploiting the system. Even the USMCA, the very deal his own administration had negotiated, was never enough. The language of partnership was replaced by the language of leverage and coercion. The threat of tariffs became a constant tool of statecraft, creating a permanent cloud of uncertainty over the continent. The fundamental assumption of trust that had held North America together for decades was fractured, setting the stage for an unprecedented act of economic aggression against America's own allies. On February 1st, 2025, the threats became reality. In a stunning escalation against his own neighbors, President Trump signed an executive order imposing a punishing 25% tariff on most goods from Canada and Mexico. To do it, he invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, a powerful law intended for rogue states and terrorist organizations, not for America's closest trading partners. It was a clear maneuver to bypass the normal rules of trade and the commitments made under the USMCA. The message was unmistakable. The gloves were off. The tariffs, set to take effect on March 4th, were designed as a political sledgehammer. The official reasoning was vague, citing the need to force concessions on everything from trade imbalances to border security. But the true goal was domination, to prove that the United States could, by sheer force, dictate terms to its allies. The administration framed this as a necessary evil, a painful but essential step to protect American industry. This was a strategy of manufactured crisis. After the initial blow, the administration relentlessly tightened the screws. Through late March and early April, new tariffs were added on critical sectors like automobiles and metals, targeting the industrial hearts of both Canada and Mexico. The ultimate threat was saved for the summer, a promise to raise the tariffs to a catastrophic 30% on Mexico and 35% on Canada by August 1st if they didn't fully submit to US demands. Publicly, President Trump was defiant, describing the tariffs as a tool of punishment and boasting that the economic pain would be worth it. He sold the policy to his base as a righteous fight for the American worker, a way to reclaim national greatness. It was a desperate, high-stakes gamble, predicated on a single core assumption that when faced with overwhelming economic force, Canada and Mexico would have no choice but to break and surrender. It was an assumption they were about to prove disastrously wrong. While Washington expected panic, it was met with a quiet, calculated strategy. Instead of facing Trump's firestorm alone, Canada and Mexico chose to face it together. The first sign of this new alliance was Mexico's shrewd diplomatic play. While Canada immediately retaliated with its own 25% tariffs on March 4th, Mexico took a different path. President Sheinbaum's government negotiated a 90-day pause from the looming August tariff threat. In exchange, they agreed to ramp up migration and drug enforcement, a tactical concession that cost them little on the trade front, but bought them invaluable time. That time was used to build a unified North American front. The pivotal moment came in Mexico City. In what officials later described as a highly productive meeting, Canada's Anita Anand sat down with Mexico's Sheinbaum and Ebrard. This was no ordinary diplomatic exchange. They were sharing intelligence, coordinating strategy, and finding a way to turn Trump's greatest weapon, the USMCA, against him. Together, they uncovered the fatal flaw in Trump's desperate scheme. The very USMCA agreement he had championed and was now violating contained the key to their defense. They realized that due to its specific rules of origin and compliance clauses, the vast majority of their trade was legally exempt from the kind of broad tariffs Trump had imposed. For Canada, a stunning 95% of its exports were protected. For Mexico, the number was around 85%. Trump had built a prison, but his prisoners had found a key hidden in plain sight. Armed with this knowledge, their strategy became clear. They would fortify their own economies at home. Canada launched a 1.2 billion Canadian dollar relief fund for its hard-hit industries, while Mexico promoted a patriotic Made in Mexico campaign that sent President Sheinbaum's approval rating soaring above 80%. Externally, they would use the USMCA as a shield, letting the tariffs hit, but knowing the damage would be a fraction of what Trump intended. They had called his bluff. This united front triggered a political meltdown in Washington. President Trump was now trapped. His tariff weapon, designed to be a cannon, had been effectively disarmed, reduced to a pop gun by the USMCA's fine print and the coordinated defiance of his targets. The August 1st deadline, meant to be a day of reckoning for Canada and Mexico, now looked like a moment of humiliation for the White House. The threat of 35% tariffs seemed increasingly hollow when nearly all trade was exempt. He was left in an impossible position. He couldn't lift the tariffs without admitting defeat, yet keeping them in place was only inflicting pain on his own country while doing minimal damage to his opponents. He had started a trade war he couldn't win, outmaneuvered by the quiet strategic alliance of the two neighbors he had sought to bully into submission. For the United States, the blowback was immediate and severe. The moment the tariffs were announced, Wall Street panicked. In the first week of March, the S&P 500 plunged, wiping out billions in wealth and signaling a profound loss of investor confidence. But the real pain was felt far from the trading floors. The tariffs, combined with the retaliatory duties from Canada and Mexico, acted as a stealth tax on American families. Independent analysis projected the trade war could cost the average household an extra $2,400 a year. Suddenly, everything from groceries to car parts became more expensive, directly contradicting President Trump's promises to lower the cost of living. The strategy designed to punish America's neighbors was systematically draining the bank accounts of its own citizens. Perhaps no group felt this betrayal more deeply than American farmers. For years, Canada and Mexico had been their largest and most reliable customers. When Ottawa and Mexico City retaliated, they targeted U.S. agriculture with surgical precision. Farmers who had weathered years of market volatility were suddenly cut off from their primary export destinations. Billions of dollars in sales vanished overnight. This wasn't just an economic statistic, it was a crisis unfolding in America's heartland. The very people who formed the bedrock of Trump's political support were now paying the steepest price for his trade war, their livelihoods sacrificed in a failing gambit. The promise of putting America first had left them last. While their strategy was effective, it did not make Canada and Mexico immune to the pain. In Canada, the threat of the tariffs sent a chill through the economy, risking a slide into recession within 6 months. The manufacturing and mining sectors, particularly in provinces like Quebec and Ontario, were hit hard. The government projected that up to 100,000 jobs were at risk. For a factory worker in Windsor, whose job depends on the cross-border auto industry, the political games in Washington translated into a direct threat to their ability to pay their mortgage. The government's 1.2 billion Canadian dollar aid package was a critical lifeline, but it couldn't erase the deep anxiety felt by communities living under the shadow of the trade war. In Mexico, the stakes were just as high. Projections warned that a sustained trade war could slash the country's GDP by 4% and cut exports by 12%, with the vital auto and electronics industries bearing the brunt of the damage. The threat to millions of jobs was real and immediate, but the pressure from the North forged an unprecedented wave of national unity. The Made in Mexico campaign became a rallying cry, a movement of economic patriotism that saw citizens boycott American goods and rally behind their leadership. President Sheinbaum's approval rating surged as she was seen not as a victim of U.S. aggression, but as a strong defender of Mexican sovereignty. The cost was high, but for many, it was a price worth paying to stand up to a bully and reclaim their national dignity. A president's desperate gambit, met by a quiet and brilliant alliance, has pushed North America to a breaking point. The economic war, intended to prove American dominance, has instead revealed the resilience of its partners and the deep shared costs of division. While Canada and Mexico have outmaneuvered the immediate threat, the foundation of trust that bound the continent for a generation lies in ruins, leaving all three nations facing a deeply uncertain future. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will all three nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American, Canadian, or Mexican? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.